I really enjoyed the earlier sessions, and I think there's lots of crossover, especially with the sessions from Wendy Hall and from Adam earlier. As Brian said, my name is Tony Roberts, and I'm a Digital Research Fellow at the Institute of Development Studies at Sussex University. And as part of my work, I convene the African Digital Rights Network. That network brings together 32 researchers, lawyers, activists, and journalists who all work on digital rights in 10 different African countries. And by digital rights, we simply mean human rights in digital spaces. So the right to freedom of speech on social media, for example. And earlier this year, we've published the first ever comparative analysis of the very wide range of digital technologies now being used, both to open and close civic space online. And by civic space, I just mean democratic spaces where citizens can safely meet, openly discuss their views, and participate in civic and political life. So in the offline world, that was the village hall or the town square. In the online world, that might be Twitter or Facebook. And today I want to focus on the kind of digital tools that are now being used in African countries, both by citizens to open new online spaces for democratic participation, as well as the kind of tools that repressive governments are using to close down those spaces, to dampen dissent and to stifle democracy. And as the title of this session suggests, I will be arguing that there's a kind of a digital arms race going on in this space. So I first want to introduce you to Atnaf Burhan. Atnaf is a member of the African Digital Rights Network, and he co-authored the Ethiopian Digital Rights Country Report, which was one of 10 reports in the publication. Now, Atnaf is an Ethiopian blogger. In 2014, he was arrested along with 12 other bloggers and journalists who were incarcerated for discussing their political opinions online. Atnaf was a member of the famous Zone 9 bloggers, 3 of whom fled into exile overseas, the rest of whom were arrested. And Atnaf spent 540 days in an Ethiopian prison, only released after a concerted international campaign. And since his release from jail, Atnaf has been a digital rights campaigner. He currently leads the Center for the Advancement of Rights and Democracy in Addis Ababa. In Britain, of course, we take our rights for granted. For us, it's really difficult to imagine living in a country where bloggers or journalists are not free, where they could be arrested or have to go into exile simply for publishing factual information in the public interest. It couldn't happen here, right? I don't know how that Julian Assange slide got in there. Sorry about that. So as I was saying, we've all got good reason to value the right to freedom of opinion, the right to freedom of affiliation, and of free speech. It can come under threat at any time, and so we all have good reason to want to protect and defend it. Coming back to this report, the background as we were writing the report was one of deteriorating freedoms around the world. According to the people who measure and track these kind of things, like Freedom House in the USA, we are currently experiencing the 15th consecutive year of reducing political freedoms and diminishing civic space. The space in which it's safe to speak openly about the government and to deliberate about alternative policies is shrinking year on year and has been doing so for a decade and a half worldwide. But it's not all bad news. Countries like the Ukraine are enjoying a dramatic democratic opening. Egypt was able to remove a dictator who had been in power for 30 years. And the USA was able to remove a complete barking nut job from the Oval Office in much less time. So there are reasons to be cheerful. In the 10 African countries that we studied, we identified 58 positive examples of digital tools being used to open new democratic spaces online. The increasingly widespread availability of affordable mobile phones, the advent of social media, and the development of encrypted instant messaging has enabled new voices to reshape politics in many countries.
Tony, sorry, could I just interrupt a second? Someone just asked, could you put your slides in presentation mode? I'm not seeing them that big.
Yes, but the Zoom...
Sorry to interrupt.
I can't get up to that. Let me see, will it go there? Now the Zoom panel is covering the bit where it allows me to go to slide share. It won't go out of the way. I don't seem to be able to move it.
Well, if not, don't worry. It's more important that we hear what you got to say.
I'm sorry about that.
No problem.
Yeah, so although we identified those 58 positive examples of digital tools being used to open democratic spaces online, we also identified 115 negative examples of digital tools and techniques being used by repressive governments to close down democratic space online. And when we look across the 10 countries, one of the patterns that emerged is that as civic space is being closed down offline, citizens make creative use of digital tools to open new democratic spaces online. But in the last 4 or 5 years, what has also become clear is that repressive governments are developing a substantial toolbox of measures that they're using to close down those new online civic spaces. And in this digital arms race, neither side is completely successful. Oh, the panel's gone. I might actually be able to do it now. Are you seeing the whole screen now?
Yes, we are. Good, thank you.
Thank you. So in this digital arms race, neither side is ever completely successful. Citizens adopt new tools, and they often enjoy a period of relative freedom until the older folk in government get to grips with the new technology. But when they do, the fact that they have much, much deeper pockets means that when they catch up, they're often able to employ overwhelming force. So this all started with text messages. SMS was the first wave of digital technologies that were used for political action. If we think back to the turn of the millennium, it was Manila in the Philippines that was the SMS capital of the world. And citizens used text messages there to mobilize and to demand the removal of the corrupt President Estrada. And they were successful. After that form of protest was used in other countries, repressive governments began introducing measures to reduce the democratic power of digital tools. In the Philippines, the government proposed a tax on texts. In Zimbabwe, they introduced a ban on bulk SMS as it was being used as a tool by activists. And in every one of the 10 countries that we researched in Africa, the government introduced mandatory SIM card registration so that they could keep tabs on all mobile users. By requiring biometric ID registration alongside SIM registrations, government surveillance was able to link any text message to a known citizen and often to a GPS location to make arrest much more efficient. So this digital arms race is being played out, but it's being played out between very unequal forces. And the vast wealth and the extensive institutional capacity of the state means that for every new citizen tactical innovation, the state is often able to implement 3 or 4 countermeasures to close civic space, dampen dissent, and increase their hold on power. And as we track each new generation of digital technology, we saw this pattern repeat in country after country. The same pattern that we saw with SMS technology was repeated with blogging. The second wave of digital activism was when ordinary citizens found they were able to circumvent the ability of mainstream media to monopolize the narrative, and citizen journalism emerged as a way to highlight a much wider set of interests and concerns than established media had previously enabled. But after a relatively brief period of freedom, repressive governments developed a new toolkit of responses for this too. As we heard earlier, in Ethiopia, Atnaf Burhan and the rest of the Zone 9 bloggers were tracked down and incarcerated or forced into exile. The state used digital surveillance of bloggers, the blocking of particular blogging platforms wholesale, and good old-fashioned analog arrests to close down these spaces. And this happened to different degrees in different countries and at different times. And the state was never completely or definitively successful, but it closed down online civic space wherever it could, and activists popped up in another space using another kind of technology in an ongoing contest that in some ways resembles this fairground attraction of whack-a-mole. So after SMS activism and citizen blogging, the next phase was corporate social media platforms. When social media was appropriated by activists during the Arab Spring in Egypt and Tunisia, repressive governments again devised new ways of closing down those online civic spaces. Repressive governments have put pressure on Facebook to shut the accounts of government critics in particular countries. And on the other side of the coin, activists have put pressure on Facebook to close down the accounts of political leaders using them for hate speech and the promotion of violence, notably Donald Trump. And powerful political forces have formed commercial partnerships with Facebook and Cambridge Analytica type agencies to use mass surveillance, artificial intelligence, citizen profiling, fake accounts, and micro-targeting to covertly manipulate citizens' beliefs and behavior. And in our research in Uganda, the government introduced a social media tax that cut the number of active users in half overnight. In Zimbabwe, the government imposed a 2,500% price hike on mobile data to price most citizens out of the market to quell dissent. And this pattern continues to the present day. As you know, in the last week, we've been reading that in the Ethiopian election, Facebook closed down 87,000 fake accounts after a government agency was found to be coordinating a vast network of fake accounts to manipulate voting intentions. And of course, the Nigerian government banned Twitter this month after tweets by the president were removed for breaching Twitter's ethnic hate speech rules. And actually, our research found many worrying examples of politicians using social media to fan the flames of ethnic division for political profit. Luckily, in Britain, our politicians would never exploit xenophobia for political purposes or use social media surveillance to covertly manipulate political choice. The serious point here is that democratic freedoms and safe civic space is shrinking. And that's true not only in the 10 African countries that we researched, but in the USA and in the UK. Digital tools are being used positively to open new civic space online, but they're also being used negatively to poison politics. The use of mass surveillance, coordinated dissemination of disinformation, blocking of platforms, internet shutdowns, taxes and price hikes, and the introduction of new laws and regulations that give government new surveillance powers are issues that we should be greatly concerned with if computing is to be used for social good. Now, nobody has conclusively won this digital arms race. There's everything to play for, but it's not being fought between equal forces. Although citizens have won important tactical skirmishes, in the long run, the vast resources of incumbent power are deployed to drown out dissent. And as I mentioned before, we're currently experiencing the 15th consecutive year in which political freedoms and civic space have diminished, prompting Freedom House to warn that we are in danger of descending into a form of digital authoritarianism. So good people working in the computing sector have a significant role to play in determining future directions. Our report suggests that there are a number of positive steps that we can take now and in the short term. We need to raise public awareness about these important issues. We need to build the capacity of civil society organizations in each country to better monitor and analyze these forces and to devise practical solutions. And we need to implement better regulation, better laws to protect citizens' digital rights and limit government surveillance and disinformation. Computer professionals and digital activists played key roles in the Philippines, in Egypt, and in the Ukraine and elsewhere. A good place for us to start is in the UK, supporting the work of investigative journalists like Carol Cadwallader at The Guardian, campaigners like Privacy International and Big Brother Watch. I believe that we need to oppose and overturn the government's Snoopers Charter or the Investigative Powers Act. And these are important ways that we can act to put our own house in order. The slide into digital authoritarianism is a global threat, it's real, but all computer professionals have a role to play in making computing for good. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that, Tony. A couple of comments and one question's coming in. Can I just put one of the questions to you, Tony?
Yep.
Are there technologies used by oppressive regimes in these ways that we should be managing like the arms trade? Ian sent that one in. Thought it was an interesting one.
Yes, I think so. Although a lot of research needs to go in before that would be a practical possibility. So I believe that the campaign on the arms trade have started looking at the trade of surveillance software. We know that it's being traded at arms fairs. It's kind of being bundled in with security infrastructure and computing infrastructure. And we know that it's being used to spy on citizens. And also, just to be clear here, states have a legitimate interest in some kinds of surveillance. I think most people would agree that a state should be allowed to conduct targeted surveillance where they have reasonable grounds that a serious crime or terrorism, that there's a threat to national interest. But that kind of surveillance needs to be obtained from a warrant from a court, and it needs to be within particular parameters. There need to be checks and balances in place. And some countries have good regulatory and legislative frameworks to manage legitimate surveillance. However, what the Snowden revelations revealed is that despite having those good procedures in place, many governments' security services in practice ignored them and have been conducting mass surveillance of their own citizens for some time, the UK included.